snows, it rains, it
Yeah.
snows, you know, that's English weather, or Scotland, or any of those. I was sitting in a meeting one day, and
Yeah.
we had, I think it rained 3 times and the sun came out 3 times in 1 hour during the
Yeah.
meeting, you know. And it's just the way it is. But it doesn't get particularly cold or particularly warm. You know, occasionally, you know, you'll have the
Yeah.
odd time when it's hot, or occasionally you'll have the odd time when they get snow, but not much at all.
And the strange part is, as far north as they are, they get very little snow. If they get snow, it shuts down.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. It's the current coming up from the, you know, mid latitudes, sweeping up towards Iceland and England and all that.
It says we're live, so we might not be very entertaining. I see a sign that says we're live and going.
Oh, well, I guess they're looking at my nose come into the camera. All right. I got 3 people, all of 3. Is that us?
That's probably is. It's me, you, and Kim. So I posted that we would be on today, but I didn't have the link. I couldn't get the link to go. So I don't know what I was doing wrong, but I put out on LinkedIn that we'd be live at 2:00 on YouTube, and look for Connect Conversations with Ron and Doug. So hopefully that works and we'll get some people to join us today.
Yeah.
All right. So Ron, what are we going to talk about today?
Leadership. I've got my stuff, my notes ready.
There you go.
I've got Warren Bennis, Peter Wickens, Winston LeDay, Peter Kirstenbaum, Jim Collins, the West Point model, Kuzis and Posner, and John Maxwell.
All right.
No, I don't plan to go into detail on any of those. Or, well, maybe Bennis a little bit, but and then I've got my own definition.
Very good. So a while back, you sent me the Colin Powell stuff, and I thought that was just, all of it was very good. I enjoyed that that little presentation of Colin Powell on leadership, and it really applies across any type of, whether it's military or industry, really all good tips on what a strong leader, the behaviors strong leader are.
I've got a picture of my son with Colin Powell.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I've got one of him with President Bush 1.
All right.
Pretty neat, huh?
There you go.
So, yep. When he was at West Point.
So your son's a West Point grad as well, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And my grandson is there now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's doing really, really well. He's finished his plebe year 8th in the class, and out of 1,000, and finished his yearling year, sophomore year, I think 35th. But he switched. Well, he didn't switch. He declared a major in mechanical engineering, so he dropped a little. Yeah. Of course, it's a little tougher.
I never
curriculum.
realized all the careers that are available. As I said, I had a friend that had a brother go to West Point. Another one went to Annapolis, and he was a ROTC at University of Rochester. But the older brother's best friend from West Point was a doctor. He went to medical school.
Yeah.
And,
well, we didn't. When I was there, we didn't have majors.
Yeah.
You know, and when my son was there, you didn't have majors. That's only come about in the past 20, 25 years or so. Which,
yeah.
You know, I guess it's a good thing. But you could go on and get a master's in just damn near anything when you graduated from there, because you graduate with 164 semester hours and a BS. So you've got a master's, you just don't know it. You know?
All right. I'm guessing that Kim just wants us to start. I thought she was going to come back in and say, hey, you're ready to go.
So, yeah, I thought so too. That's what she said. Oh, her mic is off. Kim, are you there? Or are we? We're chit-chatting. Oh, wonder if people are listening. But it was really quite an education in so many ways. You know.
Well, she is recording, so maybe she's just not listening, and we probably really should start, I'm thinking. Because it is recording. I can see that.
Oh.
And we are live. So even though I think it's just the two of us watching each other.
Okay. All right, Kim, do we start? Hello, Kim.
She says she's here. That means she wants us to start, I guess.
Okay. All right. Well, let's make a start.
All right. So good afternoon and welcome to our second live session on Connect Conversations with Ron and Doug. This week, we're going to talk about leadership. And I'm going to let, I think, Ron do most of talking about this. This guy's a West Point graduate. He knows what leadership is about. He's been on my Leadership Connection podcast, and we had a nice conversation about that. And he has, in fact, sent me a couple of presentations on leadership that were just remarkable. And so I think Ron is really a great authority when it comes to this in terms of his, not only his military background, but decades of leadership in manufacturing and the reliability world as well. So Ron, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Just a minor correction. I didn't actually make it to graduation. I got booted as a senior. So,
I did not
there you
know
go.
that.
Yeah. So, anyways,
that's okay. You know what? You know when they booted me, and it wasn't West Point. I was a freshman. Get out. So my degree was at night. I ended up having to go to the working world and then do the night school thing. So it made me appreciate. And by the time I went back, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So it was much easier.
Yeah. Well, anyways, we're going to talk about leadership, and of course, the West Point model is one of those models that come into play, at least in my style and approach to managing just about anything. I wanted to preface what we're going to talk about by saying that what we're going to talk about isn't focused on what I think of as I don't know if you call it bad leadership. It's not necessarily bad, but the type of leadership that we're not going to discuss is fear-based, grievance-based. You see that quite a bit. Nor is it just the exercise of raw power, such as what you might see with, going back decades with somebody like Hitler or Stalin or Mussolini, or in today's world, maybe, Putin or one of those guys. So it's not that type of leadership. And what we're going to go through, or what I'm prepared to have some discussion and open, for questions. What we're going to go through is maybe different, models, if you will, for leadership. And some of the things I'm happy to discuss, and I'll bounce it back and forth. We can do that. There's Warren Bennis's, he characterizes differences between leadership and management, and we'll touch on those. There's Winston LeDay's model. I'm really fond of Winston's. I like his, and in fact, I've used it any number of times in some of the work I've done. And then there's Peter Wickens. He has one. Peter Kirstenbaum, Jim Collins. There's, of course, the West Point model for leadership I just mentioned. There's Kouzes and Posner and John Maxwell. I mean, if you Google the word leadership or leadership books, you're going to get, gosh, 1,000 hits, maybe 1,000,000. I don't know. It's just any number of folks out there. And you mentioned earlier when we were chit-chatting, Colin Powell's, book on leadership. So there are lots of them. Maybe what I'd like to do maybe is start with, just at the risk of being, a little bit forward, start with my definition of leadership. And that is, it's the ability to inspire ordinary people to consistently perform at an extraordinary level. And I don't mean ordinary in any pejorative sense. What I'm talking about is regular people doing a superior job because you put them into superior systems. That is, you have the processes available to them. You let them help you develop the processes. You engage them. You go talk to them. You find out what's going on. You get them to offer solutions. It's more akin to Winston LeDay's model for leadership, where it's a relationship among leaders. You have shop floor leaders, you've got middle management leaders, and you've got, of course, senior leaders. So, and it really begs the question, how do I get people to look forward to coming to work every day? Well, you give them work they like to do, for one thing. You get them involved in improving the work so they have a sense of purpose, a sense of ownership, a sense of control. You put them on a team every now and again, where the team actively engages and solves a particular problem or restores an asset, or updates a procedure, and then you brag on them. If they do a good job, and if they didn't, you say, well, what'd you learn? What can you do differently the next time?
Right.
So if things don't go well, it's an opportunity for learning. You don't jump all over them over something like that. And every now and again, you might send them off to a training course where they learn a new skill, but you make sure they use that skill immediately upon return. Otherwise, the skill disappears, because the half-life on learning is about a week.
Yeah.
So those are the things that come to mind. Let me turn it back to you.
Yeah. When I think about leaders, this is one of the questions that I talk with people about. When we're at break on RCM, we're having lunch, and I'm doing an analysis. I'll have these conversations and talk about, if you had a good leader in your career, right? And when I'm doing RCMs, I'm typically, the guys that are involved most have at least 10 years or more. And I'm always sad when I see somebody that's, got 10, 15, 20 years that says that, what, nobody that comes to mind, right?
Wow.
And so you start talking about what are some of the differences, and I was lucky enough to have 2 or 3 that I just thought were fantastic. And one that I mentioned quite a bit, one of the things that this fellow was good at was he just was never happy with the status quo, right? And he voiced that, right? So we'd go out, if we had a major job, a shutdown, right? Afterwards, there was always a debriefing. All right, what went right? What went wrong? What can we do more efficiently, right? I'm not big on, I don't want you to work faster. I want you to work smarter, right? So what can we do to this process to make it more efficient? And we took shutdowns that were traditionally took 2 weeks and trimmed them to 4 days, right? Just by having those types of conversations, putting a map up on the wall and listing out all the different tasks. And that's what he did, was made it visual for us to say, all right, here's what Doug did this way. Here's what Ron did on this same day. Here's what Bill did. Here's what all 12 of you were doing while that was going on. Now let's look at the inefficiencies of things you could have been doing together, right, to make things simpler. So I think that when you look at leaders, they're people that, like you talk about, inspire. And it was just one of those things. It made work a learning experience. It made work an enjoyable experience. And it also taught us teamwork, right? Because we'd sit and we'd talk about these things. And I had previous bosses that, man, they never put us in the room at the same time. Other than to do a safety meeting, there was never any talk about, how we doing our job and what are the things that we could do better.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, your comment there is kind of a natural segue into maybe touching on Warren Bennis's model. And I'm going to read off a list here. I don't ordinarily do that, but he talks about differences between leadership and management. And what he says is, and I'm just going to read across: leaders do one thing, managers do another, and they're both good things. And then I want to comment on his model. He says leaders challenge the status quo. Kind of like the leader you were referring to just now. Managers accept the status quo. He says leaders trust. Managers control. Leaders innovate and develop. Managers administer and maintain. Leaders ask what and why. Managers ask how and when. Leaders do the right things. Managers do things right. And then the last one, leaders watch the horizon and managers watch the bottom line. Now, the question I like to pose to people is, having read those two lists of what leaders do and what managers do, one of the questions I ask is, could you do without either one? Well, of course not. You got to do both. The second comment, though, I give you is that the best leaders I've been around, they spend more time in that first column, more time challenging the status quo, trusting people to do the right thing, doing the right thing as opposed to doing things right. And, they're always looking out towards the horizon. Now, that's not to say from time to time they don't come back and make sure that the other column is being done. They do. But I think leaders need to spend more time in that, what Bennis calls the leadership column, and less time in the management column. Now, as you get closer to the work, of course, I think that, you ought to spend more time in that management column, a little bit of control, doing things right, standards and procedures, all that sort of thing. But then from time to time, you come up with an idea that challenges the status quo, you bring it forward. So it's really a question of balance and getting the balance right. And my view, the higher you are in the organization, the more time you spend in the leadership column. Doesn't mean you don't go to the other one. And the closer you are to the work, the more time you spend in the management column. Doesn't mean you don't go to the leadership column from time to time. So I think it makes a good model for differentiating. And then the last comment I'd have on this, at least for now, excuse me, would be that if you're undergoing a cultural change process, then you start in the leadership column, challenging the status quo, engaging people, trusting them to do the right thing, all that sort of thing. And then as you get things in place and you make those changes, then you got to move to the management column, where you lock it down with, things like procedures, standards, doing things right now that you know what right is, and looking for the results. So that's just some thoughts about his model. So you have any comments on that one?
Yeah, and going back to some of the three that I worked with, one of the other unusual traits that all three had was this want for open debate, right? The want to be challenged, the want to challenge one another, right? The first boss that said that to me, openly was, look, and I had just come out of the apprenticeship. I only had a couple of years in that particular area, right? And I remember him saying to our group when he came in, look, you guys have been here, 10, 15 years. I've been here a month now. I want you to challenge anything that I say or ask you to do, if you don't think that's the right thing, I need you to challenge that, because I'm
Yeah.
not the expert on what goes on here. Right. My job is to lead you guys, inspire you guys, and help you make improvements.
Yeah.
Right. And when you work for somebody like that, and all of a sudden you realize that they're actually serious about that, right? That you say, no, I don't think that's the way we should do this. Right. And then they look up and they say, okay, what's your way? Right. There are also people that encourage you to take risks, calculated risks. Right.
Yeah.
He used to say, look, if that risk involves, I'm going to climb up this ladder and go out on this I-beam without fall protection, that's not risk, that's stupidity. Right. Risk is something that we can calculate, that we can sit together and have a conversation about. So if you think there's, for example, we can do this job and clean it a different way, or prep this reactor a different way, let's talk about that than what's currently in our procedure. That's what I'm talking about. And let's talk about ways we can do that more efficiently. And we'll talk about the risk of doing so, and we'll do the pros and cons, and we'll weigh it out. And then as a group, we'll make a decision.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that goes a long way with people to have that open conversation. Right. And then it goes from having that conversation with the boss openly, it encourages the guys to have those same types of conversations among themselves. Right.
Yep.
And it was an eye-opening experience to work for somebody like that. And when that disappears, when all of a sudden that person, all three of them ended up getting promoted, right? Strange, right?
Yeah.
That they were recognized for doing a good job, right? When the next person comes in and they don't meet that standard, there's some culture change that goes on there as well,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
And in our case, the next person that came in realized, wow, I'm working with a bunch of strong personalities. Well, the leader made us that way, right?
yeah.
And we weren't about to change without having those discussions. And it was like, hey, dude, you got to talk about this. We're not just going to go back to this old thing. We had already talked about the way we're doing it now, right? Just hadn't been written up as a procedure yet.
Right.
So,
Well, one of the things, I just had a flashback. One of the things I would do back when I was president of CSI is, I would formulate a strategy or a proposal or whatever it might be to present to my staff, and I would go through, the highlights of it, and I would come back to them and say, any comments? And I would always say, look, don't let me do something stupid. Don't sit there like a knot on a log, thinking to yourself, well, this is crazy. I don't know everything. You may have a different perspective or know of something I hadn't even considered. So don't let me do something stupid. So, and I think when you do that, and when you challenge people to offer their ideas, you get a better product because you're considering, more of the variables, more of the issues that might come into play. You won't ever get it perfectly right. And then if they have an idea that you think is, well, not quite fully baked, then you can challenge back and say, well, I don't think that's the right thing right now, and here's why. What do you think? So I think it's that active engagement with your staff that gets you a better product. It also gets you buy-in from them because they know you've considered their ideas, and in fact, in some cases, incorporated their ideas. So they're much more likely to participate in the future. So I just think that's a better approach to things than kind of a ham-fisted, my way or the highway approach to things. Some people don't agree with that, and that's okay. And there are times when you don't have time for that kind of debate.
absolutely.
If you're in a crisis, somebody's got to make a decision and move forward, and you might pause for a minute or two to get feedback, but you got to move in whatever direction you decided is best for the company. So a lot of times leadership is context dependent. Excuse me. Like I said, in a crisis, you can't, debate things, for extended periods of time as you could in most circumstances. So it would be, well, like I just said, context dependent. So
All right. Ron, I see we have our first question.
Okay. See.
This one's from somebody who's tuned in that says, I'm in a new leadership role and I'm a younger lad on the block, so it's a struggle to get those on the same page. Any tips?
Yeah, well, I think I just gave you one. You know, I mean, you've got to assert your leadership. I don't want to, stop you from doing that, but offer it as, here are my thoughts about where I want to go. I'm reasonably confident that this is the right thing to do, but I want your feedback and I want your input before I do something. And you don't have to use the word stupid. I did. I don't want to do anything that's just a bit misguided because I'm not familiar with all the facts. So that's what I think I would do. And then as you go, you're going to learn about your staff's abilities and skills and good parts and bad parts, and you're going to be able to adjust your own leadership style to them. Yeah. So I think I would start there.
And if I could add to that, leadership is really about character when it comes to people. When you're new, the first thing that any group is going to do is they're going to start assessing your character. And I think, what I talked about earlier, starting that conversation, that open dialogue, you have to encourage that. You're going to walk in with a group and they're going to be sitting at a table and they're all going to have their arms folded, right? And you got to do something to get that conversation started, to say, hey, here's who I am, here's what I'm about, here's the way I'd like things to be. Explain your vision, right? I encourage open conversation. I encourage us to be able to identify and remove defects and improve efficiencies in how we do things. And I'm also a person that when things don't go right, I'll take responsibility for that. Showing people that you'll step up and do those things. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time, but it's not going to take 6 months.
Yeah.
It's really a matter of weeks to display the type of character that you have. Get out there and talk with people when they're out on the job, right? Ask them what you can do to help make their jobs go better or smoother, right? Have those dialogues. Meet every chance you can. I mean, the start of every day is an opportunity to meet with your group. You don't have to meet for a half hour. It can only be 10, 15 minutes. It's valuable time to start build that trust and trust along, that's a piece of that character issue that they're going to be assessing.
Yeah. The other thing that I would suggest is, don't be timid, don't be weak and sort of mealy mouth, but don't be cocky.
Yeah.
Don't act like you know everything. So there's a level of quiet confidence that you have. And it's not just confidence in yourself, but confidence in your people that they're going to provide you with reasonable and accurate information in a timely way. And you might even say that that's your expectation. And if there's a disagreement, you'll have the discussion about it and you'll explain your position and get their feedback on it. So, it's a degree of having quiet confidence, not too timid, not too cocky, but somewhere a balance in the middle where you can, demonstrate your leadership skills so that they respect you, but they don't dislike you because you've been overly zealous in your opinions. So those are, a couple of things and then we've already touched on this, is get them involved in helping you make those decisions, but you've got to create the framework, the format. You've got to put forth the ideas on what you plan to do, how you plan to do it, that sort of thing, and then get their feedback. Now, once the decision's made, it's made. You're going to move forward unless something happens to drive you to make a change in your position. And you can do that. That's okay. You just step forward and say, well, that didn't work so well, guys. Let's try this or try something else. So, but that's probably enough said. So we got another.
Yeah, it says it's hard to challenge when you have standard operating procedures to follow in an organization. I try to challenge a team to get the and then get the standard operating procedures thrown at me. So
Yeah, well, if you're going to challenge the SOP, you have to identify what you believe to be incorrect or misguided or just flat wrong, with the SOP. So you're going to have to collect some evidence as to why a change needs to be made, what the benefit of that change is, and how you propose to go about making that change. In the meantime, you probably got to follow the procedure, but you can start the discussion about how that procedure needs to be improved, updated, and so on. You've
yeah,
probably been through more of this than I have, Doug,
yeah,
relative to
absolutely.
procedures.
I worked with a company that was I won't say they were totally procedure based, but we certainly had our procedures. And number one, start with what's the history of it. Why did it get written in the first place? Number two, are there any inefficiencies built into it? Look at that. Number three is, has technology changed? All right. Technology's made a lot of difference in the way we go about doing things these days. And there's still some places that are doing a lot of old school standard operating procedures, especially in terms of PMs, where you go, holy smokes, what are you doing a PM on that thing for? Right? We could check that with condition monitoring and see a heck of a lot more that way than you can by opening it up and taking a look at it and measuring and those types of things. So, but challenge those as a group, right? Get them to look at it and say, all right, here's what my concerns are about it. I realize that's what you've been told to work by for years. If we don't challenge things, we never get any better.
Yeah.
Right. That's the truth. It doesn't matter what job you're in. If you don't challenge that status quo, you will not get better.
Yeah. Well, and like we said earlier, leaders in Bennett's model, leaders challenge the status quo. But when you make that challenge, you can't just challenge it because you don't like it. You got to challenge it with some evidence of, an outline, framework for what you're going to do differently and so on. And then let the folks that you're working with come back at you with, their input and feedback. And then you kind of wrangle your way through all that until you reach some sort of, conclusion that's appropriate for everybody. But again, at some point, somebody has to make a decision. So, and if you're the leader, you get to do that.
All right. So going
Right?
back to some of those traits of leaders, and again, the three that I worked with, and this, I shouldn't credit to all three because I had some other bosses that did this as well. We were a little bit different as a company. We shared openly where we were as a business, right? Week by week, but not always, but always at least each month. Here's what our month looked like in terms of orders. Here's what it looked like and how well we did. Here's what our revenue was here, right? You think, holy smokes, what do I got maintenance and operations people here in that meeting for? It takes 15 minutes to go through that, right? And you want people to be engaged in the business. You got to tell them where the business is at, right? You want people to
Well,
find
and
ways to
you want transparency in the
absolutely,
business.
yeah.
So,
That makes a
but
huge difference, right?
yeah. Well, that issue of transparency, if you don't share with people accurate information, they will imagine,
Yeah,
right, what's accurate,
yeah.
based on rumor and speculation and all kinds of bad things. So it's really important that that's, to the extent that you can, that you share information about how things are going and so on, and you be open and honest. And if there's something you got to talk about that's not quite right, then you can talk about, what the plan is for working to make it right. So, one other issue. Now, if you guys that had the questions, if you have follow-on questions, we'll be happy to address those. But one of the other leadership models that I wanted to touch on was Peter Wickens. Peter Wickens has a matrix. It's just a 4-box matrix where he talks about processes on the vertical axis and people on the horizontal axis. And the higher you are on these axes, or the farther out you are, the better you are. So if you're real high on the process axis, that is, you have rigorous standards and procedures and all that, but low on the people axis, that is, your people aren't engaged or they're not particularly enthusiastic, then you've got a autocratic organization. On the other hand, if you got lots of enthusiasm, but the processes and procedures are pretty crap, then you've got an anarchy of organization. People are doing everything with enthusiasm, but it's all different, and it creates chaos and anarchy. And if you don't have either, well, you've got what's he call it? Apathetic. You won't have that long because you won't be around long. But the best box to be in is where you have rigorous processes and enthusiastic people. So how do you get that? How do you get rigorous processes on the one hand without being autocratic, and enthusiastic people without being in a chaotic situation? Well, after people, think about that and, provide their initial answers and so on, you finally reach the conclusion that the way you get that is you involve the people in helping you create the processes. Because if they help you create the processes, then they have a sense of ownership, of purpose, of control, those kinds of things. And that's your best box to be in. He calls that ascendant, where you're constantly working to improve your processes, to engage your people in doing that. Now, the leader, though, let's go back to the leadership issue. The leader has to set the expectation that that's how things are going to go. And you do that by doing the things we've been discussing earlier about, you got to come forth with your plan, your strategy, your framework, whatever it may be. But then you get the folks involved, giving you feedback. And then in some cases, you challenge them to go put together a strategy, a plan, an improvement process, whatever it may be. And then you get them to bring it to the group, and then they become the leader for that particular issue. And in effect, you're training. A good leader trains leaders, because they are going to grow and develop and so on the business when they do that. Things will get better when you do that. So I'll pause there and see if Doug's got a comment or two. If not, I can go on.
So, yeah, another piece that I'll add to this is leaders actively use positive reinforcement when it comes to their people and motivating, right? They recognize people for doing not only the job they're supposed to do, but anytime they go above and beyond what their normal duties are, right? And that recognition, it doesn't have to be a thing, right? It can just be a simple thank you or recognition in front of the entire work group in the morning. And it's also understanding, does that person appreciate that type of recognition, right? There's some guys that I worked with that they were tickled to be recognized in front of the whole group. There are others that would say, please don't do that to me again, right? And those that don't want to be recognized that way, you bring them into the office and you say, hey, man, nice work you did out there. I appreciate it, right? And that goes a long way, right? That leadership of knowing your people and what reinforcement means to them, right, is a big deal. It's group activities, going beyond the pizza thing that is sometimes gotten overdone. It's, what can we do as a group to recognize the gains that we've made, right? And being genuine with that is a big part of that as well.
Now, you see, one of the guys earlier said they were new to this role. And if you're new, of course, you're going to be really you're going to lack a certain degree of confidence until you get accustomed to the role. Well, that's just the way it is, you know. And I remember the first time I took over in a, more of a supervisory role. First time was actually being a squad leader at West Point. And gosh, am I going to do this right? You always have these doubts, but you just have to grab that bull by the horns and wrestle it to the ground, and do it with a little bit of humility, because you won't do it perfectly right. But do it with some degree of confidence once you've thought it through and you believe, that you're going to be doing the right things. So it's okay to be nervous. Everybody is. I'm
And
still nervous, when I do workshops and all that sort of thing. I've got a new audience and a new crowd. You never know who's going to show up or what kind of attitude they're going to have. So I'm still nervous, and I've been doing this for 40 years. And that's a healthy thing, by the way. That's not a bad thing. That's a healthy thing, to be just a little bit circumspect, a little bit nervous, but you still got to
recognize
assert yourself.
recognize that you're going to make mistakes early on. Right. The key is to not make the same ones over and over again. So acknowledge when you made them. Right. Talk about, even if it's talking to yourself, what am I going to do differently next time? But there are ways to, when you include your group, right, to say, look, I made a mistake here. What could I have done differently? That again is that trust piece, to build the confidence in that group. It's, you think to yourself is, well, if I display that, they might see me as weak. No, it's telling them you appreciate their feedback, right?
Yeah. Well, and the other thing, just to suggest, I'm not sure who's here, but as you move through your career, you're likely to be, initially just a worker bee at some level, working for, a supervisor somewhere, and then you're going to be probably a supervisor. And then as you move up those management ranks, each time you go into a new role, you're going to be a little bit, nervous about that role and whether or not you're getting it right, or at least I was, speak for myself. Uh, but one thing I would encourage you to do, look at some of your previous leaders, both at the initial, your immediate boss plus on up the chain. What did they do in your view that was right? What did they do that was wrong? Don't do the wrong things. Learn from that. Maybe do the opposite and try to do the right things. So you've probably had lots of exposure to different folks who had different styles, and then you have to adapt that to your own personal style. Each one of us has a personal style, and just adapt that by looking at what they did that you liked, what they did you didn't like, and don't do that, and then learn from that and move forward. So I got another leadership model. Doug, you got some comments before I go to that next one?
Um, I think that I'm going to go right back to you. I've looking at my list of the things that I made for those leaders that I appreciated, and I've exhausted it, and I know you have an endless supply.
Well, I've got a long list, but I'm trying to hit the highlights first.
Sure.
So the next model that I really like, and I've used this any number of times, is Winston LeDay's model. And well, first off, he says a leader is anybody that has followers. Now, and that's a good definition, because there are leaders sometimes on the shop floor that have followers, and you don't really want them doing the things they're doing, because they're disgruntled, they're upset about something. And I think the best way to address that is to take that on as a challenge and try to get them involved in fixing the things they think are wrong, if that's the right thing to do for the business. And if it's not, you need to tell them that. So, but anyways, leaders have followers, and you're going to find all kinds of leaders at all kinds of levels in an organization. And some of those are explicit, as in the org chart. Some of them are implicit, as in the influence that people have within an organization. You have your formal org chart, then you have the way things really get done. And the way things really get done is probably more important than the org chart. So just keep that in mind as you're exercising your leadership. But within Winston's model, he says you have what he calls executive leaders. Now, executive leaders provide the vision and the resources. Here's where we're trying to go. Here's the resources I'm providing. And then the next level down, you have operational leaders. And they're anywhere from first line supervisors to, maybe production maintenance managers, departmental level managers. And they provide the time and the people to actually make the improvements. And then the next level down, and there's some overlap in here. You probably understand that. Next level down is what he calls network leaders, and what I call shop floor guys, and they provide most of the ideas for improvement. There's some studies done by Klaus Blake that says 70% of the improvement ideas come from the shop floor. So it's really important that the executive and the operational leaders be engaged to some degree with the shop floor, so you're getting the ideas for improvement where things are right, where things are wrong. And the way that all works is leadership is a relationship based. It's a relational effort amongst those different levels to try to make sure you're doing the right things. That the vision is set, you've got the resources, that the operations guys are approving the time for folks to do the improvements, and you've got a free flow of ideas on where things are not going so well that you can act on and get their ideas for the improvement. And then when you do that, of course, you have to create small improvement teams that periodically, you have what I call structured improvement time, where you periodically address one of those ideas, involving different people at different times to address those. So that's a model that I've seen work really well within any organization, really, and not just manufacturing, but other organizations. So that's another model that I am really fond of. So I'll turn it back to you there, Doug. Any comments on that?
My comments are, I see one quick thing that we might want to cover before we wrap up, and I know we're getting down on time here, is how you go about identifying leaders, right? One of the ways that we used was talking to the people in the work group themselves, right? Having sit downs when it comes to doing performance appraisals is saying, all right, who are the folks that you're working with that you think stick out as leaders, and start that way.
Well, just had one comment, and I'll turn it back to you. One of the comments I make from time to time is that leadership is a little bit like pornography. Of course, when I say that, everybody's ears perk up. The point, the point being, Justice Potter Stewart, who sat on the Supreme Court, one time they were having a case about free speech versus whether or not it was pornographic, and he said, it's hard to describe about pornography. He said, it's hard to describe, but I know it when I see it. Well, leadership has somewhat that same characteristic. It's kind of hard to describe, but I know it when I see it, because it's somebody that you trust. Trust is a really key element in any leadership model, is building the trust, among the parties. It's not just trust across, or not just trust in one direction, but it's trust in both directions. I trust that you're going to do it right. You trust that I'm going to give you the right direction and resources, that sort of thing. So it really does have to do with knowing it when you see it. But some of the common elements here are, one of them is trust. Another one is setting the example in what you do. And there's some others. So sorry for interrupting. It's one of my, more important issues, I guess. Doug, turn it back to you.
Yeah. I know it when I see it. It's the people that step up, right? And again, by speaking with their peers, often that you're going to find out things that you might not see because you can't be there all the time.
Right.
Right. That there are some folks that when they get out in the field and things get kind of sticky, those folks that pop up and take the leadership role, sometimes you would hope that you see all that, but you'd be surprised how some different names come up to say, hey, here's a person that when it gets hairy out there, there's he or she is cool under pressure, right, and
Yeah.
has the ability to get people focused and get the job done. And that those are some of the key elements of when it comes out to maintenance and reliability is who's got a cool head, who can focus the team in the right direction and get them moving to get things accomplished.
Yeah. Well, a couple of more comments on different leadership models. And I just want to touch on a couple of points that I learned at West Point. One of them was you choose the harder right over the easier wrong. And that can be really difficult sometimes, choosing the harder right over the easier wrong, because there are lots of situations you're going to be in where there is no right answer. There's no real wrong answer. There's just options, and you're caught sometimes between a rock and a hard place. So you've got to make decisions that do the most good or have the least harm, that sort of thing. But if you try to choose the harder right over the easier wrong, I think you'll be better off. And then the second one, and there were many, I can assure you, but the one I wanted to mention was one of the things we were taught was that the unit commander, or the department manager, if you will, whoever it may be, CEO, is responsible for everything his unit does or fails to do. And when I read that the first time, I thought, well, how can I be responsible for some wingnut out there that does something crazy? Well, the point being, though, is you have to be proactive about, looking at what's happening in your unit. They're trying to make sure you identify the potential harm that could come from the behavior of one or more of your people. And you've got to address that before it comes to that. So having to do that, I think, was a really important point. And then the last comment I wanted to make was about, leaders are demanding, and you need to be demanding, set high standards and expectations, and supportive. That is, you need to provide the resources, whether that be money or people or training or whatever it may be, in order to help your people be successful. I know most managers are out there are very demanding. And I once told a refinery manager, said, Ed, you're very demanding, but you're not very supportive. And he said, I heard his feelings. And he said, well, what do you mean? And we went through some things, some little examples on where he was being demanding, but not particularly supportive. And to his credit, he changed, and then he actually provided, this the level of support that was needed to meet his demands. So I'll hush there. I mean, I could go on, but I won't.
All right, so we've had our pretty close to hitting our wall on time here, so I do want to go over what we're going to talk about 2 weeks from today. First of all, it's going to be aligning the organization and building the foundation. That's a pretty big topic. So how do we get our organization aligned with what are the right things to do, and how do we build that foundation to make sure that we can accomplish what we need to do down the road? All right, so we're going to get into talking probably about equipment hierarchies and criticality analysis and identifying tasks and all those types of things. What makes a good foundation for a maintenance and reliability program? So, Ron, it's been great to chat with you again. I'm hoping that next time we go from having, 4 or 5 people to 400 or 500. That'd make things interesting, wouldn't
it? Well, good luck with that, So, but yeah, that'd be great. The more people that are aware of these principles, the better off we're going to be. Not just you and me, but I think that the country is going to be.
Well,
Yeah,
judging from our
so-
start this week, they might change the title of the podcast. Two guys that don't know when to start.
or stop.
Hey,
All
Ron,
right.
have a great day.
Yeah, thank you all for coming, and hope to see you again at some point. Good luck to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.